You know that moment, when your blood starts to boil, when your thoughts sharpen to a point, when the world around you suddenly becomes crystal clear through the lens of absolute certainty. Anger doesn't just feel powerful, it feels right. Like finally seeing the truth that everyone else is missing. But what if I told you that your anger, that righteous, clarifying force, is actually a sophisticated defense mechanism? A psychological algorithm designed to protect you from something your brain considers far more dangerous than conflict. What if your rage isn't the problem at all, but rather the solution your mind created to an entirely different threat? In this video, we're decoding the hidden algorithm behind chronic anger, and why, for many people, rage isn't just a reaction. It's an addiction, more powerful than almost any other. Most people think anger is a problem to be managed, a failure of emotional regulation. But what if it's actually working exactly as designed? What if your anger is doing precisely what your brain programmed it to do? Protect you from something far worse than conflict. The truth is, your brain would rather have you angry than empty. And, there's a neurological reason for that preference that nobody's really talking about. When you feel that familiar surge of anger, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals, adrenaline, norepinephrine, and even a hit of dopamine. This neurochemical mixture doesn't just prepare you for confrontation, it creates a state of heightened alertness and focus that feels undeniably good compared to the alternative, vulnerability, uncertainty, or honestly the worst of all, emptiness. It's the difference between feeling powerful and feeling powerless, between having a clear enemy and having no direction at all, between feeling something intense and feeling nothing worth noting. Think about the last time you got really angry. Remember how your thoughts crystallized? How everything suddenly made sense in a narrative where you were justified and someone else was clearly wrong? That's not an accident. That's your brain creating order from chaos, certainty from confusion, power from powerlessness. In neurological terms, anger activates your sympathetic nervous system, the same system responsible for your fight-or-flight response. It floods your body with energy, sharpens your focus, and gives you a sense of agency in situations where you might otherwise feel helpless. But here's what most people miss. This response isn't just physical, it's deeply rewarding on a psychological level. Studies using functional MRI have shown that the brain's reward pathways light up during anger in ways strikingly similar to addictive behaviors. The neural signature of rage bears an uncomfortable resemblance to the brain on substances. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to be angry than sad? How rage feels active, while grief feels passive? How much more comfortable it feels to blame than to grieve? That's not weakness or immaturity. That's your brain making a calculated decision about which emotion serves your survival better. And in many cases, especially for those who've experienced trauma or prolonged helplessness, anger wins that calculation every time. When you're angry, you're in control. When you're empty, you're at the mercy of whatever might fill that void. Your brain knows which option feels safer. Consider this scenario. Someone you trusted betrays you. You have two immediate neural pathways available. The first leads to hurt, vulnerability, questioning your judgment, wondering if you're worthy of better treatment. An emotional minefield of painful self-reflection. The second leads to righteous anger, where the problem is clearly them, where your judgment remains intact, where you feel powerful rather than wounded. So which path would your brain prioritize, which feels, less threatening to your sense of self? For many people, especially those whose early experiences taught them that vulnerability leads to harm, the anger pathway becomes so well-traveled that it turns into an automatic response. It's kind of like the neurological equivalent of a superhighway, while the path toward vulnerable emotions remains a treacherous, overgrown trail. This is where anger becomes algorithmic, a programmed response that just runs automatically whenever certain conditions are met. It's almost like a psychological subroutine designed to bypass more painful emotional processes. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your brain doesn't just prefer anger because it's less vulnerable than emptiness. It actually prefers anger because anger creates a narrative. And humans are storytelling creatures to our core. Emptiness offers no story, no villain, no resolution, no meaning, just an uncomfortable void where certainty should be. Anger, on the other hand, creates an instant narrative with clear characters, the wrongdoer, the wronged, the justice that needs to be served. Our brains would rather have a negative story than no story at all. A negative story still offers the possibility of resolution, of change, of justice, of meaning. Emptiness, though, offers none of that. You've probably noticed this in yourself or others. The person who's always finding something to be outraged about, or maybe the family member who seems to thrive on conflict. The friend, who's perpetually engaged in some battle or another. These aren't just personality traits, they're coping mechanisms. They're ways of filling a void that feels too threatening to face. The most surprising aspect of anger's algorithm is how it creates the illusion of connection. When you're angry at someone, you remain intensely connected to them, even if that connection is negative. Your thoughts revolve around them. Your emotional state depends on them. In a twisted way, anger maintains relationships that might otherwise dissolve into the ultimate threat, meaninglessness. Think about how often people stay in conflicted relationships rather than face no relationship at all. How communities sometimes define themselves more by what they oppose than what they stand for. And just consider how much of our public discourse revolves around shared outrage rather than shared values. That's the algorithm at work, filling emptiness with anger because, well, anger still contains the seeds of meaning, of story, of connection, even if it's a bit of a distorted one. But here's where this insight becomes truly valuable. Once you understand that your anger is actually protecting you from emptiness, you can start asking better questions about both emotions. What is this emptiness I'm so afraid to feel? What would happen if I allowed myself to experience it directly instead of converting it to anger? What am I really protecting when I choose rage over vulnerability? When you start exploring these questions, something remarkable happens. You discover that emptiness itself is not the featureless void your brain has been treating it as. It's actually a complex emotional landscape that your anger has been preventing you from mapping. Inside what you've been calling emptiness are subtle emotions your anger algorithm has been overriding. Grief, longing, uncertainty, disappointment, loneliness, emotions that feel passive and powerless in the moment, but actually contain the seeds of genuine growth and connection. Here's a practical tool I call the 5-second pause. The next time you feel anger rising, that familiar heat, that clarifying certainty, pause for just 5 seconds. Not to suppress the anger, but to check what came before it. What more vulnerable feeling was present for a microsecond before your anger algorithm kicked in and overrode it? Was there a flash of hurt, a moment of fear, a twinge of shame? That fleeting emotion is what your anger is protecting you from, and naming it, even if only to yourself, begins to disrupt the algorithm. Another powerful shift comes from recognizing anger's relationship to control. Anger makes us feel in control precisely when we're most afraid of having no control. It creates the illusion of agency when we most fear powerlessness. If you find yourself frequently angry, ask yourself, what am I afraid of not being able to control here? What outcome am I attaching my sense of safety or self-worth to? And what would it mean to accept the limits of my control in this situation? These questions don't diminish your legitimate grievances. They simply help you recognize when anger is serving as a protective mechanism rather than a proportional response. The most liberating discovery in this entire process is realizing that emptiness itself is not actually empty. What we fear as a void is actually a space of possibility. What feels like an abyss is actually a clearing, and what seems like an ending can become a beginning. But your brain's algorithm can't compute that possibility. It operates on a simpler equation. Emptiness equals danger. Anger equals safety. Upgrading that algorithm requires experiencing what you've been avoiding and surviving it. Discovering firsthand that vulnerability, uncertainty, and even grief don't destroy you, they transform you. There's a profound quote from psychologist Carl Jung that captures this perfectly. No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. The emotions we're most afraid of, the ones our anger protects us from, are often the very ones that contain our greatest capacity for growth and genuine connection. This doesn't mean anger has no place in a healthy emotional life. Anger can be clarifying, motivating, and even necessary in the face of injustice or boundary violations. The problem isn't anger itself, it's automated anger. Anger as a default setting rather than a chosen response. When anger becomes your go-to emotion, when rage feels more comfortable than vulnerability, you're not experiencing the genuine situational anger that motivates positive change. You're running an algorithm designed to protect you from emptiness at all costs, even when that cost includes your capacity for joy, intimacy, and peace. Breaking this pattern isn't about suppressing anger. It's about becoming curious about what your anger is protecting you from. It's about developing the emotional capacity to face emptiness directly. And discovering that it's not actually empty at all. but full of the very emotions that make us most human. The next time you feel that surge of righteous certainty, that clarifying rage that makes everything simple, just pause for a moment. Ask yourself, is this anger proportional to the situation? Or is it protecting me from something that feels more threatening than conflict? That question alone can, honestly, begin to rewrite the algorithm that's been running in the background of your emotional life. Your anger has been protecting you. And, there's wisdom in that protection, but you are capable of facing what lies beneath it. You are strong enough to feel the emotions your anger has been helping you avoid. The emptiness you fear isn't actually empty. It's, full of everything you haven't let yourself feel. And, feeling it won't destroy you, it will finally set you free. If this perspective resonated with you, you're likely someone who thinks deeply about your emotional patterns and wants more than the standard advice to just manage your anger. You're looking for genuine understanding and transformation. Subscribe to the Behavior Algorithm for more insights that go beyond conventional wisdom and address the real mechanics of our most challenging emotional experiences. Together, we can decode the hidden patterns that keep us stuck and discover the freedom that comes from truly understanding why we feel what we feel. Remember, your emotions aren't problems to be solved. They're messages to be decoded. And once you understand what they're really telling you, everything changes.